So, my name's Rob. I have one way or another been involved with out of home for over 21 years now, which is quite scary to actually say it out loud. Started off working 16 years on the media owner side for a number of different vendor partners that still work with regularly today. Gave me a very good grounding, and then I did the road less trodden and moved over in 2016 to MEC, which is now Wavemaker. And since I've been there, I've done numerous roles, still with out of home at the core, to now be up to a managing partner on the media team. But very much believe in out of home, still think it has a very valid place. It's nice that being able to talk about the evolution of it here today.
Thanks, lovely.
Thanks very much. Thank you for having us today. I'm Alys, Donnelly. I'm head of Programmatic at Kinetic UK, and I take care of our programmatic team to develop our programmatic products in that space. I joined Kinetic 2 or 3 years ago now, so I'm a very newcomer into the space, but really excited about the programmatic opportunity that there is there. And previous roles, I've been more on the addressable TV side of things, kind of display side of things, and search, as well as some kind of project-based roles. So more of a digital person coming into out of home or the other way around.
Brilliant, lovely. And Gordon.
Thank you, thanks for having me. I'm Gordon. I head up the UK office for Splicky, which is an out-of-home focused DSP. Like Alys, I'm quite new to digital out-of-home. I've got more of a digital background, mainly in mobile, where I've been responsible for the launch and leading of the UK offices for a number of global mobile startups. I launched the UK office for Splicky back in March last year, which probably the worst time you could launch an out-of-home business. You know, we're trying to sell out home, and everyone's been told to stay at home. But you know, I'm here.
Good.
Really looking forward to seeing where this space leads. And it's been a great event so far. Some very exciting topics being brought up, and it seems like there's lots to come.
Brilliant. Well, thank you three, and thank you very much for being with us. So just before we kind of launch into it, I think, and it's been talked about a lot today, about the acceleration of the adoption of AdTECH and programmatic out of home. It's been touched on in every conversation today. But just before we kind of do a deep dive into the benefits and the challenges, which is really what we're going to talk about, I'd love to hear the one thing, just quite briefly, the one thing right now that you're really excited about, that you're seeing that's adding value to either your business outcomes or your clients' business outcomes. So, Alys, let me go to you first.
I think the thing I'm most excited about is the joining together of data and other tools that we have and we're building. So it's really about kind of refining the data sets that we've got, kind of supplementing them where it really adds value, and to be able to dive down into the data set that really will add value to the campaign and offer something a little bit different to the client, and then being able to explain that to them as well. So kind of the data and, I guess, the education piece around that.
Brilliant. Great. Gordon, what about you? What's the one thing that's getting you excited in the sector?
Only one thing?
For now.
Okay, well, one thing that's got us really excited is we're seeing a lot of interest from direct clients. So smaller, mainly from the e-commerce background, so DTC clients. And I think a lot of this is due to, we've seen a lot of research over the past few years around how out of home can really influence mobile and online interactions, and that seems to be filtering through. And I think this is really exciting for the industry as a whole, because it's new money. So we're all expecting growth, and this is just going to add to that.
Brilliant, I like that. New money. Well, we always love that. Rob, what about yourself?
I suppose my audience is returning. I think that's the thing that's been keeping me awake at night for quite a while. But it does seem to be on the go again. But I think the way that it's given another layer to creativity. The one thing that out of home has always been, market leader at, in my view, is the ability to deliver a message creatively to a mass audience. But now we have the opportunity to do something which has a layer of contextuality or timing to it, which can be even more relevant to the whole storytelling process, which makes that message more sticky and hopefully out of home more relevant.
Yeah, love that. And we'll talk about creativity a little later, because I think that's a really important thing that often gets just dropped at the end of the conversation, but we will come back to that. So just to talk about our headline, so the topic, which is the role of the out-of-home DSP. We've seen considerable proliferation of out-of-home DSPs, certainly as we talked about the last 12 months, and more partnerships taking place. What do you see as the differentials between a dedicated out-of-home DSP and an omni-channel DSP, obviously the advantages and the challenges, but also to add in what, maybe in your minds, where would you like to see the out-of-home DSP evolve further? Alys, from a Kinetic perspective and running that department, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And I think from my perspective, it comes down to, kind of a point solution versus the full stack solution. So if we think about kind of the point solutions that are out there, so the Vistars, the high stacks, the Splickys, when you're looking inside those tools and those bits of tech, you often have some really lovely kind of out-of-home specific tools or kind of points of interest. It could be, we talk about these a lot, but a really simple, easy to use and powerful weather trigger or pollen trigger.
Yeah.
Or kind of importantly, the capacity to build your own additional ones on top. So you can get something really nice and bespoke for a client in there, which really adds that kind of unique punch to your kind of media plan. So the point solutions tend to be a little bit more focused on these areas, and a little bit more focused on the nuance of out of home and kind of surfacing that information to a user where you can actually find it helpful and in the moment when you're trying to optimize. So it could even be small things around formats that are kind of displayed correctly and all those good things, as well as really focusing on the geo and surfacing that data. So it's a large part of what is important. Whereas if we're looking at the more full stack service, so kind of the Trade Desk, the DV360s of the world, the big play there is kind of the cross-channel element, of course. So ease of moving budgets around from maybe your display element, maybe that's underserving, can we get that money away on the out-of-home side? Terrific, we should be able to move budget nice and smoothly. I think, so kind of functionality-wise, those are the things we'd expect. But then we also need to look at kind of development and agility and speed of demand, I'd say, as well. So with the kind of the point solution guys kind of new in the space, there's a lot of agility there. They tend to be maybe small organisations that are scaling very quickly. Potentially there's faster development there and slightly more agility in the development. And potentially on the full stack side, you've got very, very well-established players in the market with very well-established DSPs and the way that they do things. So very much around out-of-home fitting into that, as it were. So speed can be a little bit slower, perhaps. A little bit.
Yeah. It's quite interesting when we're talking about the targeting new revenues. So if you're in the omni-channel, there's greater opportunity for that crossover. So there are in both places advantages and challenges. What's your thought on that and the differentials between the two?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Alys said, so I'm going to try not to repeat too much of it. So, I mean, I guess, why do we need a DSP in the first place? I think is the first question. And the answer is going to be very similar across all media. It allows you to automate, it allows for flexibility, for more interesting data strategies, being able to implement other sources of data. So really once you've got past that point, you need to ask, what's the best DSP for what I'm trying to achieve for a particular client, for a particular campaign? I think the digital out-of-home or the out-of-home DSPs, they're built around that channel. So what they can offer is functionalities, features that are specific to out-of-home. So, for example, how is the supply, how's the inventory presented, how's that managed? That's going to look very different in a out-of-home DSP compared to a omnichannel DSP. Reporting, so the granularity of reporting, the requirements are going to be different in out-of-home compared to what you see in an omnichannel DSP. So I think that's a very important differentiator. Other features, again, as Alys mentioned, you can do more interesting things around, say, trigger targeting. So, I mean, if all you wanted to do was a guaranteed buy, then you can do that on any DSP.
Right.
If you wanted to do something more interesting, which is specific to out-of-home, then an out-of-home DSP is your choice. I think also the strategy behind how these DSPs evolve are different. I mean, if you're a larger omnichannel DSP across multiple markets, You can integrate with just a handful of the larger SSPs, like, for example, Broadsign gives you massive global reach, a few of those, and that should do the trick and will be useful to most of your clients. Using Splicky as an example, so there are specific markets which we're strong in, and the strategy has been very much been driven around, what do we need for that market? So let's take our home market, Germany. We've got that ability to integrate with smaller partners. They may not be necessarily strategic for a much larger omnichannel like a trade desk, but for us, we're going to be a lot more agile, so we can integrate these smaller partners quite quickly. It also makes us a lot more useful to our clients within those markets. So, I think that, same with data as well. Very similar process, very similar thinking around integrating with different partners based on what your focus is, the media and the market.
So, yes, brilliant. So that works a bit into, as Adam was saying a moment ago, with regards to the markets and driving the DSP there. But that's lovely. Rob, what about you? What's your view on this one?
I was going to say, I was tempted just to go what they said. But
you told me that earlier, yeah. Too late now.
Gordon and Alys put it far more eloquently than I will. But looking at, be it an omni-channel DSP or an out-of-home DSP, I think the important thing from my perspective is that for years there have been studies that demonstrate how out-of-home amplifies in the media mix with other channels. Mm-hmm. I think now we're talking in a language where it's far easier from an agency perspective of planning by audience, which we do for a lot of other channels, to start to actually rely on the data and the DSP functionality to start to plan out-of-home in a lot more naturally. Yes, we have a brilliant out-of-home specialist in Kinetic, but I think it raises the... I suppose just raises the horizons for the actual teams when they're thinking about how they use out-of-home above and beyond the standard 2-week buy that we've currently done for years.
You're right. That's still running, and it will take some time before we get a blend of the two, and that's very much driven by data, which brings me really to another question, which we couldn't have this conversation without, which is understanding, as I say, that the conversation a lot at the moment is on the post-cookie world. And I'd like to ask what your thoughts are, what on the implication for the out-of-home sector, what's that going to look like? Where do you see the opportunities once this happens, and what are your greatest concerns? And maybe, Gordon, maybe I can, as you talked about your platform, maybe you can tell us what you think on that. The new rules around cookies, I think this is going to be a bit more of a concern for digital. Because of the one-to-one nature of that media. What cookies have enabled them to do is enables them to target, to personalize their campaigns, it enables them to measure, and what they're going to find going forward, it's going to be a lot more challenging. It's going to be difficult, it's not going to be impossible, but it's going to be a lot more challenging for them to find their audience, and everything that comes after that. So personalization, measurement, that's also going to be affected. So, but there is an opportunity here for out-of-home. And I think these new rules, what it's done, it's kind of leveled the playing field a bit. So one of the reasons why digital has been so successful over the past decade is because of that data piece. It's allowed digital sellers to go out and say, look, these are the amazing things we can do because of the data. But now with new rules coming in, you can see the use of data in digital is being restricted, whereas over the past few years, data in out-of-home has just come up. So we're now at a... considerably more sophisticated and broader.
Exactly. So it's a level playing field, and that will make things easier when it comes to, say, pitching for budgets. We can start, once again, magnifying all the great things about out-of-home, the high impact, the creative offering, the high impact creative, the broadcast nature of that. Bearing in mind that all of this existed long before digital, long before cookies. And again, it's just an opportunity to bring that back to the forefront. So, it's an opportunity.
Okay, lovely.
Concerns, I think my concern isn't really about cookies, it's more about another identifier, which is the mobile identifier. So
let's come back to the mobile in a while, because let's just get Alys's view on, from a Kinetic perspective, on the post-cookie world. Bearing in mind we're talking about the role of the DSP. So what's your thoughts in that area?
I think it provides us with a real opportunity. So one of the strengths of out-of-home, as I think we've touched on, is that it harnesses the power of context really nicely. And it allows us to kind of layer over multiple data sets to build up a really solid understanding of how people in a certain audience move throughout the day.
Yep.
And that's
Yep.
where we can really add that value to an advertiser. So marrying up the power of audience and the power of context while not being too reliant on one area in particular. So I think it's kind of reignited interest in the power of context, and is giving out-of-home a real opportunity to showcase the advances that have been made and kind of, show the power and the benefit of that to clients.
What about concerns? What worries you about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, kind of having, digital is obviously a giant kind of channel. Out-of-home can't compensate for all of that in its entirety. So kind of the out-of-home can't be a panacea for the challenges that are in the cookie world. So I think it's very much around being mindful and conscious of the data that we're using and how we're applying it and what we're saying that can do and what the value of that is. So kind of leaning into the contextual piece, I think really helps us have that conversation in a way that's helpful and appropriate for clients in the current climate.
Yeah.
Because I suspect it's still not finished shaking out where it's going to end up.
No. And Rob, what's your thought on?
I was saying, from an agency perspective, there's been a lot of work we've been doing about the cookieless future for our big digital spenders. That's a work stream that's been going on almost for a year now already to get our clients ready. I think that I wouldn't go so far as to say digital out-of-home is the heir apparent, but it's, all of the stuff that we have worked hard at, beyond the pandemic, but definitely there was a speed up in terms of the necessity for data to prove where audiences are. That's here to stay. If anything, the data will get stronger and more accurate. And in many ways, if there is an alternative for clients that are looking at something which, is very transparent, does offer a good level of not a one-to-one interaction, but a one to a far more defined many.
Yes.
And also, let's not forget, out-of-home does offer a whole load of other attributes that digital doesn't. It can help develop a brand. It can offer other things on top. So I think there's definitely a place that it's almost like a bit of a sweet spot. I think we're entering the right time where out-of-home is reaching, a point where it can maybe answer a few questions or solve a few problems for the clients that are, maybe in a pickle over cookieless future.
And what about the concerns for you? What about your clients' concerns? What are the conversations you're having with clients?
I think the thing with out-of-home, when you're changing something that fundamentally, the most traditional media that's been around since the dawn of time.
Yeah.
So now you're turning around and trying to explain to them that this is, it's all brand new tech, it's a new way of doing it. What you don't want them suddenly to start doing is everyone just shifts to, I want to buy efficiently, I want to buy by audience, because it still has to ratchet back to why they're using out-of-home in the first place.
Couldn't agree more.
So it's as much about tempering expectation and interrogating the brief and understanding the right time to use this particular offering. I think the general concerns with any channel that is embarking on something different is not repeat the same mistakes that have maybe been inherent of conventional digital in the past.
Yeah.
The transparency, the third-party verification, a lot of stuff that's already been mentioned here today.
We're going to come back to that one. I'm going to come back to that because I think that's a really good point. Understanding that the supply chain is different, but I think it's something we should talk about. But following on from data, obviously we talk about data a lot. We know it's the backbone for driving programmatic out of home. And I've got a slight multi-layered question here. And Alys, I'm going to come to you first on this one. Do you think we make the most of the data that's available to us? And how does that benefit the advertiser? And then I'm also quite interested to know your thoughts on whether there's too much data and we're losing sight of the customer experience and expectation. I know there's 3 questions in that one. I apologise, but give it your best shot.
Okie dokie, right. Give that a go. Are we making the most of data?
Yeah.
Yes and no. So I think that specialists, and I know kind of on the Kinetic side of things, we've put an awful lot of focus on this and we're using it in our programmatic products, really developing kind of what GDPR compliant third-party data is out there. Right. Where can we get purchase data? Where can we get attitude data? Where can we get web app use data? Combining them all together in a way that makes sense for what we're actually trying to do. And again, I think to Rob's point, like we're not a one-to-one medium, we're one-to-many.
Yeah.
We're always going to be that, and that's a really beautiful thing. But it's around making that appropriate, I think is the key. I think an area where there's a really nice opportunity for us is potentially around first-party data.
Yes.
is there a way that we can help clients understand maybe what they've got, and also the ways in which we can use that? Do we need a massive live ramp integration? Not always. It doesn't have to be something that is as big and dramatic and potentially expensive and challenging as that. So it could be, something as understanding, we have seen, increased sales in these areas. Can you please adjust delivery according to that? Of course we can. That's brilliant. Yeah. That's perfect for us. That's a really appropriate, specific, valid use of data.
And brings the immediacy of digital out-of-home straight into play.
100%. And there's the value for the client. So we can bring a lot of really great stuff to the table, and we've developed the products to do that really clearly. And we're seeing clients kind of have the aha moment and bring that on board. But I think where we can do more is, helping clients understand what they've got that can help us. What's kind of a really nice quick win and what might be more of a long-term partnership.
And I'm kind of guessing when we start talking about first-party data, and our clients have so much data, most of it they just sits in a drawer somewhere. It's working at how it's comparable and how we can use it and integrate it into systems, but it's also understanding if it's clean data. So we've got to go back to the methodology. How is it collected? Has it been misconstrued in some way, because that can send everybody off on the completely wrong channel. Rob, what's your thoughts on that? I know, again, it was the 3 questions in one, and you're not going to remember what they are you?
I won't have remembered one. I think, from my perspective, I think there is, and Alys touched on it, I think there's good data, and there's sometimes data just for data's sake. I do know that we've done a lot of similar campaigns to some of the other specialists before. They're like pollen activated, heat activated. Some of these have been around for a lot longer than we've been doing digital out-of-home buying in this way. But I think it's when you start getting down to that data stream that can create something really clever, creative and contextual can be the difference between signing something off and a client being very validly interested in something and wanting to progress. Equally, we've got some data streams that show that you can activate an out-of-home campaign on digital by soil moisture.
Wow.
Now, as much as that's incredible, I think I'm all about in out-of-home telling a story. I would challenge anyone to understand why a campaign's gone live and then go over and feel the grass just to see, But so it's about the right use of data and effectively how well it turns around and activates the campaign for the necessity of the brief.
Brilliant. Soil, wetness of soil. Okay, fine, I'll think about that one.
Good campaign.
Thank you. And Gordon, what about you in these 3 questions? Because this must be an area where mobile really suddenly brings in a new data field to you that you can start to work with.
I think I remember all 3 questions.
Do you want me to have a run? Do you want to run through?
I'll do my best,
okay.
And stop me if I get it wrong. If I start answering a completely different question. So, do we make the most of the data?
Yes.
I think the answer is we try. There's a ton of data out there, and the challenge is really sifting through all that, finding the right data sources in terms of relevance, quality, the right data to help you achieve those KPIs. Why do we use data? There's 3 reasons. It's targeting, measurement, also in
business outcome.
Yeah, business outcome. Yep. So we can start measuring real-world KPIs. Footfall, sales. So measurement's important. Big opportunity in out-of-home now is using data to inform creative. So using triggers, I think. So there's many examples of how that could work. So we've all heard of weather triggers. It's been talked about a lot. I've had interesting conversations with car manufacturers around using pollution levels.
Right.
So if a pollution NO2, I think the gases hits a certain level, that could trigger an ad. And what you've got there is a much more impactful campaign because it's relevant to the real world conditions. So data is like I said, data is we're trying to use the data the best way we can. You may have to repeat the other 2 questions.
I just thought this was an angle where you could bring in, you wanted to talk about mobile and maybe where the mobile data, does that have a role to play here? Bearing in mind, I know our topic was the role of the out-of-home DSP, but from a mobile perspective with the data that's being collected there.
Yeah, this is something which we need to be, the mobile opportunity is there. The mobile opportunity is there. I think I was going to mention earlier, one of my concerns was around the changes that Apple have made with iOS 14, and Google's never far behind with these things. So if a data provider is unable to continue to provide scale, that could create challenges around what we use that data for. I mean, it's been great in powering footfall studies. Right. It's been great in driving some forms of targeting. But I mean, that still exists. And using mobile data to inform creatives and knowing where people are looking, using that data to track movement, etc., is another powerful way to, well, it applies to all of those things, to measurement, targeting and creative.
Okay, lovely. It's really interesting, I have to say, from my own experience and working in this field quite a lot, is that people have so much data, but very little information. And it's understanding how to filter through some of that data, how to make it usable, how to make sure the methodology, the way that it's collected, is usable and is clean. And I think that will accelerate again further in the digital out-of-home and again on DSP. So I'm just going to come back to a question to Rob, you touched on a bit earlier. There's been so much conversation, not so much in the last year, but certainly previously with regards to the conventional programmatic, and I know we're talking about the role of the dedicated out-of-home DSP, but about transparency, about verification, about accuracy of targeting. Now, as I mentioned, our supply chain is considerably smaller, so it's a lot easier for our clients and specialists and agencies to follow the money, so to know exactly where it's all been attributed. But in your, and we've seen, and Tim's here, and Tim's been a great, he wasn't paying any attention there, he's been a great, oh, thank you, a great advocate in our standardisation, so we applaud him for that one. I know we're going to hear from him a little later. But what else would you all three like to see across the processes and procedures that will amplify the trust in out-of-home, the trust in the world programmatic, because a lot of clients that I work with still go, oh, not sure about that. So, as I say, we've got a smaller supply chain, we can follow the money easier, but what are the other things that you would like to bring in? And yeah, Rob, if you started that, so carry on.
Lifted the microphone, now I've got to go. I think, you hit the nail on the head, I think the first thing is don't break the trust.
Yeah.
In that we do have a medium which everyone understands, and even if maybe some clients don't use it as much, everyone likes out-of-home. You get that general impression that a good out-of-home campaign will resonate, and a lot of people will want to either go on social media about it or just like it in general. I think the thing for me is that as we grow, as the ecosystem grows, so there are more and more sites that will then be digitized across the country, more of them that will then have the tech capability to be put into a DSP or buy through this route. I think there's something to be said for a level of standardization in the nature of the impacts being delivered. So within this room, there'll be representatives from different specialists, different agencies, and even different media owners that will all have their own mission of how they're going to apply this. And it is tricky. After the year we've had, when out-of-home has been brutalised, now we're seeing audiences come back. Media owners need to be able to turn around and make yields on their panels, and that will be through conventional means or by engaging in this new opportunity through programmatic and API-linked sales by audience. But for me, I think as it grows, clients will want to know that there is some kind of unified system of, maybe is it root at its core, or, so that every single activation is brought to a certain level of criteria, regardless of where it is, so that you'll know there's consistency in the market. Because given the number of panels that, in the future that, there's more, I think in the region of 6,500, 6,000 panels that are en route at the moment. Right. Now that is one of the base cores that we use, obviously, within Wavemaker and Kinetic for doing a lot of our activations. That's the founding piece of data at the very beginning. Absolutely. But I do think that as it escalates, I think having that can expand across the industry, shared understandings of how we go about driving this, that will give clients and brands confidence that this is something which they can have, will invest in, will have, understand that what they're going to pay for is actually being delivered on, and will actually appreciate the level of transparency and thought that's gone into it to developing the product in the first place. And have you witnessed those conversations with your own clients? Have you witnessed a concern or a hesitation? Yeah, I think someone once said to me, just because you can doesn't mean you should. There are I can tell you now there are people I still speak to at clients that would like it if we didn't digitise all panels, and we just they're very happy to buy 96 sheets in volume. They still have their place. Exactly. They still have their place. If I could go back and buy 1,000 of them now, I'd be laughing. But I think that Yeah, it's the unknown. Again, these might be clients that have been burnt before by buying programmatic by the conventional digital method, or it might be just the fact that this seems very new and how they've used out of home. They understand what it does for them as a brand and the USPs that it delivers. So it's almost, where does it fit? Yeah. Is it trying to do a job of digital in which I've already got digital for that? It's not going to do that one-to-one interaction. So where does it fit in the media mix? And then, obviously, very close behind that is the transparency. How do I know what's being delivered? Who's marking the homework? All of these come into play. But I think that, Alys will testify to as well, we have a system that when we can talk them through it and we can show that these procedures are being followed, then I think it's almost that eyes lighting up moment where you can apply the creativity and then it becomes quite exciting.
So there's quite an education piece still that needs to continue.
Definitely.
For as long as.
Definitely.
And following then, Alys, as Rob points to you, what are your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I'd like to pick on two bits that kind of Rob teed up. I think having measurement and could be from root, obviously really kind of robust methodology that goes into that, having that as standard across every media owner would, from a buyer's perspective, add a lot of value, and it would also allow us to scale in a different way and in a more flexible and in a larger way from the programmatic side of things. So I think that's definitely an area. There are good verification players in the market at the moment. We work with them very, very closely. One way I would like to see that develop in the future is using potentially pixel-based ways of tracking rather than necessarily looking at player reports. There are lots of players that do this now, so there's opportunities there.
Explain a little bit more about that, the pixel-based.
Yeah, so I won't bore you too much.
No. Top line, 2 sentences.
Yeah, so going very much into where you pop a pixel into your creative, and when the creative loads in the frame, it fires and it sends a message back to your verification tool. Lovely, lovely.
Yeah.
So if we're thinking around, and what I think some of us have mentioned as well, is trying to grow the pot, looking at incremental spend. If we're thinking about this from a display advertiser's perspective, they might think that is kind of standard bet, and that's what they'll be getting on everything. But that is a relatively new innovation in the digital out-of-home space, the programmatic out-of-space. So I think there is a dialogue to be had there, and there's progress that we can make, kind of moving beyond player reports and moving towards an enhanced third-party verification of where we're at. Because we don't have third-party ad serving in programmatic out-of-home that we do in the same way in the display programmatic side of the world. So again, to the point about education, it's a really important piece here. So we're very clear around what it is, what it isn't, what the value is, what the value isn't, and how we're going to get to those points.
And the industry needs to be talking the same language.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we've witnessed confusion before. So yeah, that's really, really key. And Gord, what's your take on this as well?
Okay, so you've mentioned 3 points. Transparency, verification,
just as examples. So yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So
but there are multiple. If you think, was it about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, when the missing 15%? So there's been quite a big conversation about.
Okay, starting with transparency, I think we're in a good place with out-of-home. It's a very transparent medium. Looking at it from a consumer standpoint, comparing it to digital, we've all had this experience. You go to an e-commerce site, you view your products, and that product is following you around wherever you go. And there's very little transparency in terms of what is that data, how is it being shared, how is it being used, and we just don't have this problem in out-of-home. It makes it a very trusted media. There are pitfalls. I'll come to that in a second. I think just moving on to the second point around verification. Solutions do exist, as Alys mentioned. I think on a linear buy, there's some very robust solutions that work really, really well. When it comes to RTB, programmatic, I think there's still a lot of work to be done. I know there is a lot of ongoing projects, a lot of ongoing conversations. So we'll see this happen very soon. And I think that's important because buyers need to know that what they're getting, what they paid for is actually what they're getting.
Absolutely, you're right.
So that's really important. Quality of data, you have to be very careful in terms of the partners you work with, the data sources. There's lots of factors involved. How do they collect that data? How frequently do they update that data, for example? These are all really important things you need to consider. As an example, if you're doing location targeting, using IP as a way of tracking location just isn't accurate compared to GPS. So that's something which needs to be thought about. In terms of kind of things we need to think about, processes, etc., we need to be very wary of GDPR. So I mentioned there are potential pitfalls with out of home. It's trusted, but we need to maintain that trust. Mm-hmm. There are certain things where we could potentially fall down. So, for example, using bidstream data to track footfall. If it ever came out in the news that people were being tracked just based on their browsing habits, this could be potentially quite damaging to the industry and to the parties involved. We often have conversations, requests from clients around mobile retargeting, so looking at users around the screen and then retargeting them on their mobile devices afterwards. I mean, it's technically quite easy to do if you've got that data, that access to those mobile device IDs. But from a privacy standpoint, we don't think it's right, so we don't do it in that way. So, I mean, some companies might do it. There might be some bad players out there. I'm not saying there are, but potentially there could be. But again, in the wrong light, making this known in the wrong way could be quite damaging to, reputationally quite damaging to companies, and also can erode that trust in out of home, which right now we're quite.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, the out of home industry has for a long time been one of the most trusted channels, and with education and standardization and the use of language in the same way, we should still be able to accelerate that. Finally, I have one question, which is something again is quite a passion of mine, is out of home as a creative canvas. So out of home generally, whether it's a skin, whether it's static, or whether it's digital, but one of the elements of digital, and we've talked about creativity that's triggered, whether it's triggered by weather, whether it's car registration, gender. There are loads of triggers that we can do now that will serve contextually relevant creative, but we still have a long way to go, I think, where it comes to creative. The creative teams that I work with love out of home. They really love it when they can get to grips with it. So in your mind's eye, where are the areas that we should really be developing the creativity? And it's something that you mentioned a moment ago, Rob. So do you want to lead us on the creative side for digital out of home?
I think sometimes it's probably the most important part of an out-of-home campaign. And we've talked today about how data is very important. And let's be honest, not just in new wave digital out-of-home. Data is used in conventional out-of-home planning a lot anyway. But I think that it's all well and good if you can now pinpoint with relative accuracy where my audience is at the right time, at the right location, and then what I serve up in some way hasn't been thought of to the same degree as the pipework that's got that message there. So I think it's very, very important that it's no coincidence that when the creative is done correctly, suddenly those campaigns are elevated to winning awards.
Yeah.
And what's the secret to it? It's just that they've thought about the actual story they want to tell and how it all links together when it arrives at that point where we actually see it on the streets. I think in terms of how, it's interesting how the tech's getting better all the time. Like I'm 2 been in this game so long now that I can remember when the first digital out-of-home screens went in and we were being shown videos of Minority Report of what it would look like next year.
I think I still use that.
Exactly. I'm waiting for a 6 sheet to tell me I need a Guinness, because that would be going off quite a long time, I think. But look, for me, the tech's enhancing. I think there are more and more screens going in the ground, which gives bigger opportunity. It's a bigger inventory list. There's more opportunity then, more scale to actually plan around, because out-of-home is still a finite medium. So when you start to plan it by these different granular points and everything, there's only so many you can do. We don't have the luxury of a complete track that digital does. But I think that the next thing for me will be the speed of activation. It's coming down rapidly all the time, but the ability from pressing that button to when it appears, then that's exciting. So all the other things you've already mentioned, which make this particular opportunity in out of home exciting, that's the bit that then it opens up other markets. Yeah. Be it the idea of a digital 6 sheet near a football ground with live odds. So before that wouldn't necessarily, there's risks with that and mitigating,
But it's context again. We're talking about context.
It's just very much about the speed at which you can deliver something adds to the context. So I think that's an area that, as that improves and gets better, I think that will open up more opportunities. It creates more exciting campaigns and things that really will resonate with the audience. Because I do
Which is what
think
it's
that
about.
when it lands with them and they think, my God, you're talking about something that I've just heard about in the news and there's a relevant copy related to a brand, that becomes so sticky for a client. And that's the sort of thing they want, is that memorable, bam, I've recalled that ad weeks later. So
Lovely. We've got an intruder. So we've run out of time, Alys and Gordon, on your creativity, but I'm sure we can squeeze it in somewhere.
I do have one question from our online audience. So actually, it's from somebody that we know pretty well. So Nigel Clarkson has just dropped in to say, thanks for an interesting session. Great to talk together about the future. What are the panelists' thoughts about the imminent arrival of big omni-channel DSPs?
I think I'm going to throw that straight to Alys.
Okay, what do we think about
it? Drop you in it there, Alys.
No worries. I think there's opportunity there for sure, right? So I think it's about understanding what they've got, kind of what their roadmap is for the future, how they see that fitting in with the other parts of their offerings. So obviously, kind of the Trade Desks, the DV360s, the Verizons, they're all quite different. Yeah. They all do. Fundamentally
everyone's slightly different. It's a bit like ingredients, cooking a cake. They're all slightly different.
Absolutely, yeah. I guess I'll summarise that. It's exciting, kind of them coming to the world, seeing what they can do. I think kind of need a bit more understanding of what they've got, where they want to take it, how they see it as part of their overall offering, and kind of how they're adapting to the nuances and the specificities of out-of-home in particular.
Brilliant. And Gordon, have you got anything to add to that? What's your thoughts?
I feel like I may have answered this question already.
Give it another go.
I spoke about why we should be thinking about the specialist DSPs alongside the bigger omnichannels, and my role at Splicky, because that's what we are, we're a specialist DSP, is to kind of amplify those benefits. And I think, there is room for everyone, but when it comes to digital out of home, I don't think they're quite there yet in terms of how they manage out of home. So building an out of home campaign in MediaMath, for example. We've had feedback from buyers from agencies in terms of how easy or how difficult that is to do compared to the out of home DSPs that they've tried. So there's a big disparity right now, and there's going to be a bit of time before that comes together.
Good.
Right. Sorry,
excellent.
Guys.
And I think we're done.
Yeah.
So can I just thank all three of you? Thank you for bringing your expertise to us, and a lovely panel. Great. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you very much.